Something is happening to them right now. There are moments in life when justice does not arrive with thunder, but with quiet unraveling. The person who wounded you, the one who manipulated, distorted truth, and drained your spirit, is not as steady as they once appeared. Something has shifted. Something is breaking beneath the surface. You may not see it directly. You may not receive a dramatic announcement, but there is an unmistakable pattern forming. They are not well. Their energy is off. Their composure is strained. The confidence they once weaponized now trembles at the edges. And what makes it undeniable is this: it began after you were removed from their life. Not when they changed jobs, not when their finances shifted, not when circumstances turned. It began when God separated you from them. There is a kind of collapse that does not shout. It drains, it weakens, it disorients. It begins quietly, like a slow leak in a structure that once appeared solid. And this is not superstition. This is moral order. When a narcissist lives by control, domination, and distortion, they depend on external reinforcement to sustain internal instability. Remove the reinforcement, and the instability surfaces. The sudden, physical, and energetic decline. When God separated you, something invisible but decisive shifted in their life. For years, they functioned on borrowed stability, borrowed from your patience, borrowed from your restraint, borrowed from your willingness to absorb tension without retaliation. You may not have realized it at the time, but your presence buffered consequences. Your calm softened their volatility. Your conscience restrained their recklessness. When God removed you, that stabilizing influence vanished. And what followed was not drama, it was deterioration. Not theatrical collapse, not public humiliation, but decline. You begin to hear it in subtle ways. They don't seem like themselves. They're exhausted lately. They've been dealing with strange health issues. They're under so much stress. The decline is not loud. It is draining. Understand something. A narcissist lives in constant internal strain. They must maintain an image. They must control perception. They must suppress insecurity. They must defend superiority at all costs. That kind of existence is not sustainable without reinforcement. You were part of that reinforcement. When God separated you, the reinforcement stopped, and the body keeps score. Not because God strikes someone with illness like a weapon, but because the human system cannot endure chronic pride, hostility, and deception without consequence. The nervous system does not thrive under constant manipulation. The heart does not rest in perpetual control. The mind does not remain clear when it must constantly distort truth. What they once projected outward is now circulating inward. The stress they placed on you has nowhere to go. The tension they created in the room now lives inside their own chest. The anxiety they caused you to feel now unsettles their own sleep. And this is where people misunderstand divine justice. It is not always immediate catastrophe. It is exposure to what one has cultivated. For years, they cultivated dominance and emotional pressure. Now they live under it. And when that pressure builds long enough, the body begins to respond. Fatigue that will not lift, aches that seem disproportionate, stress reactions that doctors struggle to fully explain, symptoms that do not align neatly with lifestyle changes. This is what people call mysterious. But there is nothing mystical about strain manifesting physically. You cannot live in constant internal warfare and expect peace in your body. You cannot sustain a life built on superiority and expect rest in your nervous system. When God separated you, He did not curse them. He removed the cushion. He removed the distraction. He removed the person who absorbed the overflow. Now they sit alone with their own intensity. And intensity, when turned inward, becomes exhaustion. It becomes burnout. It becomes instability. The irony is painful. They once accused you of being weak. They belittled your sensitivity. They mocked your conscience. But sensitivity is not weakness. It is awareness, and awareness is protective. They suppressed awareness. They rejected reflection. They dismissed accountability. That suppression does not disappear. It accumulates, and eventually the body demands payment. This is not cruelty from God. This is design. God created human beings as integrated systems, spirit, mind, and body intertwined. When one dimension is distorted long enough, the others begin to signal distress. You were separated because God would not allow you to continue carrying someone else's imbalance. Once you were removed, the imbalance became fully theirs. And now the strain is visible, not as spectacle, not as vengeance, but as decline. And while they struggle to understand why their energy feels depleted, why their confidence feels fragile, why their health feels unstable, you begin to see something else. Clarity. The separation was not just protection for you. It was exposure for them. And exposure, when resisted, becomes pressure. Pressure, when prolonged, becomes breakdown. That is not superstition. That is consequence unfolding. It started when God removed you and the structure began to crack. There is a difference between a breakup and a divine extraction. Many people think you simply left. Some assume you finally reached your limit. Others believe the relationship just ran its course. But that is not what happened. God removed you. And when God removes someone, He is not reacting emotionally. He is intervening deliberately. You were not pulled out of comfort. You were pulled out of corrosion. For years, you functioned as an unseen stabilizer in their life, not because they deserved it, but because you were built with steadiness. You absorbed outbursts. You translated confusion into clarity. You diffused tension before it escalated. You held conversations together that would have otherwise collapsed. And the narcissist, whether consciously or not, leaned on that stability. They did not appreciate it. They did not acknowledge it. But they depended on it. When God separated you, that invisible scaffolding was removed. Imagine a structure that looks solid from the outside. Clean lines, confident presence, strong voice, controlled image. But internally, the beams are misaligned. The foundation is stressed. The weight distribution is uneven. As long as temporary supports are in place, the building stands. Remove the supports, and the stress redistributes. That redistribution is what they are experiencing now. Not punishment, pressure. Pressure that was always there, but managed. You were part of the management system. When God intervened and pulled you out, He did not inject chaos into their life. He allowed the chaos they had cultivated to operate without insulation. There is a profound difference. For years, they externalized discomfort. When they felt insecure, they projected superiority. When they felt threatened, they created conflict. When they felt exposed, they manipulated perception. You absorbed much of the impact. Now there is no one to absorb it, and so it circulates inward. That is when the structure begins to crack. They may not articulate it this way. In fact, narcissism resists introspection, but internally, something feels unstable. Their confidence does not land the same. Their arguments do not feel as powerful. Their presence does not command the room the way it once did, because presence fueled by domination is fragile when it stands alone. When God separated you, He did something more than end a relationship. He interrupted a cycle. He interrupted your role as stabilizer. He interrupted their access to your empathy. He interrupted a dynamic that was quietly draining you while quietly sustaining them. And when the interruption took place, the balance shifted. You felt disoriented at first. They felt invincible. But over time, the truth revealed itself. You began to regain clarity. They began to experience strain. The timeline matters. Look back carefully. The insomnia began after you were gone. The unexplained fatigue surfaced after you were removed. The irritability intensified when you were no longer there to calm it. The pressure mounted when the arguments no longer had an outlet. They may blame aging. They may blame stress. They may blame circumstances. But the shift aligns with the separation. Because you were never merely a partner, a friend, or a family member. You were containment. And containment, when removed, forces the contained to face itself. God did not remove you to destroy them. He removed you because He would not allow you to continue carrying what was never yours to carry. And once you were gone, what they had been distributing outward began accumulating internally. This is why the decline feels sudden. But it is not sudden. It is revealed. The cracking was always present beneath the surface. Your presence masked it. Without you, the pressure concentrates. And pressure reveals structural integrity. If the foundation is humility, pressure strengthens it. If the foundation is pride, pressure fractures it. The narcissist built on image. Image cannot withstand sustained internal strain. So the cracks widen. Energy diminishes, clarity blurs, stability wavers, and they do not understand why they feel weaker without the person they once claimed was inferior, because strength was never theirs to begin with. It was borrowed from your restraint. It was borrowed from your conscience. It was borrowed from your patience. When God separated you, the borrowing ended, and what remains is the raw structure. This is not mystical retaliation. It is exposure. Exposure to self. Exposure to imbalance. Exposure to the weight of a life lived in constant control. And when exposure is resisted, it becomes internal friction. Internal friction, when sustained, becomes exhaustion. Exhaustion, when prolonged, becomes breakdown. That is the progression unfolding. You were removed for protection. They are now encountering the full weight of what they built. What they sent out is now circling back inward. There is a principle woven into the fabric of God's design that no one escapes, not the powerful, not the charming, not the manipulative. What a person repeatedly releases into the world does not disappear. It returns, not always immediately. Not always publicly, but inevitably. For years, the narcissist released pressure into your life. They released criticism that chipped away at your confidence. They released tension that unsettled your sleep. They released confusion that made you question your own perception. They released subtle hostility disguised as superiority. You felt it. You carried it. You prayed through it. And because you were the one absorbing the overflow, the system appeared stable. But when God separated you, something fundamental shifted. The direction of the pressure changed. What once flowed outward began flowing inward. Understand this carefully. God does not need to invent punishment. He allows consequence to mature. A life built on domination produces isolation. A life built on deception produces anxiety. A life built on superiority produces instability. These are not mystical curses. They are outcomes embedded in the structure of creation. When someone lives in constant comparison, their nervous system never rests. When someone lives in constant image management, their mind never relaxes. When someone lives in constant control, their body never softens, and over time, the strain accumulates. You were once the outlet for their unresolved tension. When they felt insecure, they corrected you. When they felt threatened, they belittled you. When they felt exposed, they shifted blame onto you. You absorbed that pressure like a release valve. Now the valve is closed. Now there is nowhere for the tension to go. And tension, when contained, intensifies. It tightens the chest. It disturbs sleep. It weakens immunity. It drains vitality. This is why what appears as a mysterious illness is often the visible side of invisible accumulation. They are not being struck by heaven. They are being governed by what they cultivated. For years, they cultivated internal agitation. Now agitation governs them. For years, they cultivated hostility masked as strength. Now hostility manifests as internal unrest. For years, they cultivated control at all costs. Now they feel out of control within their own body. That is not coincidence. It is alignment. God's design is not chaotic. It is ordered. When someone repeatedly violates the design for humility, truth, and restraint, the consequences are not theatrical, they are structural. The narcissist believed that power meant immunity. They believed charm meant exemption. They believed manipulation meant advantage. But power without humility corrodes from within. Charm without integrity exhausts the mind. Manipulation without repentance destabilizes the soul. And when the soul is unstable long enough, the body begins to reflect it. This is why their decline feels confusing to them. They cannot see the connection between behavior and breakdown. They cannot see how years of pressure have accumulated into fragility. They may seek medical answers. They may seek external explanations. They may blame aging, stress, or circumstance. But what they cannot easily face is the internal origin. God separated you because you were not designed to carry someone else's disorder indefinitely. When He removed you, He did not create consequence. He stopped delaying it. There is a sobering reality in this. Divine justice is not loud. It is precise. It does not need spectacle. It requires only time. Time allows patterns to mature. Time allows habits to entrench. Time allows internal strain to reach its threshold. And once that threshold is reached, the return begins. What they sent out returns as exhaustion. What they projected returns as anxiety. What they imposed returns as internal heaviness. You once felt the weight of their intensity. Now they feel it alone. This is not revenge. It is release. You were released from carrying it. They are now carrying it themselves. And that is the shift that makes the illness seem mysterious. It is mysterious only to the one who refuses to trace the line backward. But the timeline tells the truth. After God separated you, the circulation reversed. After God removed you, the pressure redirected. After God intervened, the insulation disappeared. And once the insulation was gone, the system began regulating itself. That regulation is not gentle. It is exact. And for the first time, they are experiencing internally what they once distributed externally. The mysterious illness is the body responding to a life out of alignment. When people hear the phrase mysterious illness, they often imagine something dramatic or supernatural. But what is unfolding here is far more profound and far more sobering. This is not about lightning from heaven. This is about alignment. God designed human beings as integrated systems. The spirit influences the mind influences the body, and when one dimension is consistently distorted, the others cannot remain untouched. For years, the narcissist lived out of alignment with humility, out of alignment with truth, out of alignment with restraint, They learn to suppress conviction instead of responding to it. They learn to overpower discomfort instead of examining it. They learn to dominate conversations rather than engage them honestly. And that kind of internal posture creates strain. You cannot live in constant superiority without tension. You cannot live in constant comparison without anxiety. You cannot live in constant control without fear of losing it. The body registers what the ego denies. For a time, the strain can be masked. A person can function on adrenaline. They can power through on image. They can distract themselves with success, attention, or validation. But the human body was not designed to run on internal warfare indefinitely. And when God separated you, the distraction was removed. You were not merely a relationship. You were a stabilizing influence. You were a quiet counterbalance. Your conscience, your patience, your calm presence slowed the escalation of their inner tension. When God lifted you out of that dynamic, He did not create illness. He removed delay. Without you there to soften their agitation, the full weight of their internal posture began to press against their system, and the system began to respond. Fatigue that does not resolve with rest. Stress reactions that seem disproportionate. Persistent discomfort that doctors struggle to categorize. A sense of fragility where once there was force. This is what happens when a person's inner life has been out of alignment for too long. The mind can rationalize pride. The ego can justify control. But the nervous system cannot be fooled indefinitely. A heart constantly on guard eventually grows weary. A mind constantly defending its image eventually grows strained. An identity built on dominance eventually collapses under its own rigidity. This is why the illness feels mysterious. It is not tied to a single event. It is the cumulative result of years of manipulation, years of hostility disguised as strength, years of refusing introspection, years of pushing conviction aside. The body is not punishing them. It is signaling overload. And here is the sobering truth. When God separates someone from a destructive dynamic, He is often giving the remaining person an opportunity to reflect, an opportunity to soften, an opportunity to realign. But narcissism resists reflection. Instead of asking, "What is happening within me?" they ask, "Who is to blame?" Instead of examining patterns, they search for external causes. And so the internal strain continues. When strain continues without correction, it deepens. Not because God delights in suffering, but because God does not override design. He created human beings with interconnected systems. When the inner life is chronically disordered, the outer life eventually mirrors it. This is not cruelty. It is consequence built into creation. You were once the shock absorber. You once carried the emotional turbulence so that their system could function without immediate breakdown. Now they are alone with their own turbulence. And without you, the strain intensifies. This is why their decline feels confusing to them. They believed they were strong. They believed they were superior. They believed they were immune. But immunity built on denial is fragile. Strength built on control is unstable. And when the internal architecture is rigid and unyielding, pressure does not strengthen it, it fractures it. The mysterious illness is not random. It is what happens when a life lived in domination finally confronts the limits of the human frame. God did not curse them. He removed you. And in removing you, He allowed the natural weight of their own patterns to rest where it belongs, on them. This is the turning point where divine justice becomes visible, not as spectacle, not as public humiliation, but as internal reckoning, the reckoning between how they have lived and how they were designed to live. And when that reckoning is resisted rather than embraced, The strain becomes embodied. You were removed to be preserved. They remain to be confronted. And confrontation, when delayed for years, is rarely gentle. They are beginning to recognize the pattern, but pride will not let them admit it. There comes a moment, quiet, unsettling, undeniable, when even the most defiant mind begins to notice a pattern. At first, they dismiss the fatigue. They dismiss the tension. They dismiss the instability as coincidence. But time has a way of clarifying what denial tries to blur. They may not say it aloud. They may never confess it publicly. But somewhere beneath the surface, a realization begins forming. Everything changed after God separated you. The timeline is too precise to ignore. Before the separation, they felt powerful. After the separation, they felt pressure. Before the separation, they felt energized. After the separation, they felt drained. Before the separation, they felt in control. After the separation, they felt unsettled. And no matter how hard they attempt to attribute the shift to circumstance, the sequence refuses to disappear. Narcissism resists self-examination. It deflects, it reframes, it redirects blame. But even narcissism cannot fully silence awareness forever. Awareness has a way of knocking at the door of the conscience. They begin to sense that something protective left when you did. Not because you were their savior, but because your presence created equilibrium. You were steady when they were volatile. You were reflective when they were reactive. You were grounded when they were inflated. And when God removed you, that counterbalance vanished. For the first time, they are living without insulation. And that realization is deeply unsettling. Because if the shift began when God separated you, then the separation was not random. If the decline began when God intervened, then the intervention carried meaning. And if the intervention carried meaning, then their suffering is not merely bad luck. That thought is dangerous to pride. Pride can survive failure. Pride can survive public embarrassment. Pride can survive aging. But pride struggles to survive the idea that God has withdrawn protection. There is a subtle terror in realizing that the dynamic shifted not because you were weak, but because God decided you were not meant to remain there. That realization forces a person to confront something they have spent years avoiding. They were not in control. They may replay conversations in their mind. They may recall the moment you left. They may remember how certain they felt that you were the one who lost. And now, quietly, the evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests that when God removed you, something of value left with you. Not value in status, value in stability, value in restraint, value in protection. And the narcissist, who once believed themselves untouchable, begins to feel exposed. They may never articulate it as divine justice, but internally they sense that something larger than circumstance has shifted. Why did the decline not begin earlier? Why did it not begin during other stressful seasons? Why did it begin after that particular separation? These questions surface in moments of honesty. Moments when the house is quiet. Moments when sleep will not come. Moments when the body feels fragile. And in those moments, the pattern becomes harder to deny. They may not connect it to humility. They may not connect it to repentance. But they cannot ignore the sequence. God separated you. After that, the pressure intensified. This recognition is not liberation for them. It is discomfort. Because if the separation was purposeful, then their current instability is not accidental. And if it is not accidental, then it carries implication. Implication about how they lived. Implication about how they treated you. Implication about the posture of their heart. For a person who built their identity on superiority, implication feels like accusation. An accusation feels like threat, so they fight it. They rationalize. They distract. They double down on image. But beneath the surface, awareness grows. They feel the absence of your stabilizing presence. They feel the weight of their own intensity without relief. They feel the strain without outlet. And in their quieter moments, they understand something they would never say aloud. The separation marked a turning point. Not for you alone, for them. God's intervention did not simply relocate you, it reoriented their life, and they are living in the aftershock of that reorientation. This is where divine justice becomes deeply personal, not because God humiliates, but because God allows awareness of pattern, awareness of consequence, awareness of design. While they struggle, you are being strengthened, and that is the real victory. Here is the truth that brings peace. This message is not ultimately about their decline. It is about your preservation. For a long time, you may have wondered whether God saw what was happening. You prayed, you endured, you kept your integrity when it would have been easier to retaliate, and there were moments when it felt as though injustice had the upper hand. But separation was not abandonment, it was intervention. When God removed you from that dynamic, He was not only preventing further damage, He was preparing you for restoration. Notice the contrast. They are experiencing instability. You are experiencing clarity. They are experiencing strain. You are experiencing release. They are confronting pressure. You are rediscovering peace. That contrast is not accidental. When God separates someone from a destructive influence, He does not merely extract them from harm, He restores their equilibrium. Your sleep begins to return. Your thoughts grow quieter. Your sense of identity strengthens without the constant distortion of criticism. You begin to realize that the heaviness you once carried was never yours to begin with. And this is the value for you, the listener. Divine justice is not about celebrating someone else's suffering. It is about trusting that you do not need to enforce consequence yourself. You do not need revenge. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to expose them. God handles exposure in His timing. Your responsibility was endurance with integrity, and you did that. The lesson here is not to sit back and watch someone deteriorate. The lesson is to recognize what separation accomplished in your own life. You were carrying tension that affected your body. You were living under pressure that disrupted your peace. You were absorbing instability that clouded your clarity. Now that you are removed, your system is recalibrating. Your nervous system is no longer bracing for conflict. Your mind is no longer anticipating manipulation. Your spirit is no longer weighed down by constant defense. That is restoration, and restoration is evidence of divine care. The narcissist's struggle is not the centerpiece. Your strengthening is. God separated you not to create drama, but to create distance between you and destruction. He removed you because He values your well-being. He removed you because He sees beyond the surface. He removed you because what they were building would have eventually crushed you if you remained inside it. And now, as they confront the weight of their own choices, you are free to rebuild your life without distortion. That is the gift hidden inside justice. You are no longer confused. You are no longer second-guessing your perception. You are no longer questioning whether you were too sensitive or too emotional. You are becoming steady again. And for those of you listening in your 50s or 60s, perhaps after decades of carrying other people's immaturity, this is deeply significant. It is never too late for peace. It is never too late for clarity. It is never too late to step into a season where your body, your mind, and your faith align again. God did not separate you to diminish you. He separated you to protect your future. And while someone else wrestles with the consequences of a life built on control, you are being invited into something quieter and stronger. Freedom. Not freedom to resent, freedom to rest. not freedom to retaliate, freedom to rebuild. The real testimony is not that they are struggling. The real testimony is that you are standing calmer, clearer, and no longer carrying what was never yours. And that is where peace begins.